everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Molly, also known as Mojo. If you've seen any one of my videos, you already know that, but if you're new here, thank you so much for joining. I recently completed a through hike of the Wonderland Trail, so I wanted to make a little video just with some information that I found helpful when I was doing research for this trail. So things like permits, water crossings, if you need a bear canister, where you camp, like just things like that. If you're planning to through hike the Wonderland Trail or even do a section of it, you might find this video helpful. If you're unfamiliar, the Wonderland Trail is a roughly 90 to 93 mile trail that circumnavigates Mount Rainier and Mount Rainier National Park, which is in Washington State. It is considered a very challenging trail, mostly because of the elevation gain and loss. Over those 90 some miles, you will ascend 27,000 feet and descend 27,000 feet. The most popular time to hike this trail is definitely in the summer months, but permits are available typically from the beginning of July to mid-October. Probably the most confusing thing about the Wonderland Trail is actually the permit system and how to actually get a permit, because let me tell you, it can be quite difficult. There are 3 ways to get a permit for the Wonderland Trail. The first one is through the early access lottery. Number 2 is just through their general open sale of permits. And number 3 is a walk-up permit. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail for each of those. So let's start with the early access lottery. Mount Rainier will release about 2/3 of the available permits for the early access lottery. What you want to do is log on to recreation.gov in like mid-February in order to apply for the early access lottery. You definitely don't want to miss that date. I don't know exactly what it is because it changes a little bit every year, but it's typically early February. So after you have applied for the lottery, around March 14th, you will get an email from recreation.gov and you will either see, congratulations, you have won the lottery and here is a time slot, or like what I always see is, sorry, unfortunately, you did not win the lottery. But if you happen to be one of those people who are given a time slot, that is going to be the next step. So you will be given a date and a time to log in to recreation.gov and try to create your permit. So you're going to get some time slot, but typically between the end of March and the end of April. So anywhere in that month could be your time slot. So if you are granted a slot earlier in that period, you are going to have a better chance of putting together a permit for your trip and getting more of the campsite options that you prefer than if you were given a later date. But that's just how it is. Even if you do win the lottery, you're not guaranteed like your perfect permit. It's all just based on availability and where you fall within that window and things like that. Another thing to note is that when you're making the permit reservations, you're gonna go in and like select the campsite that you want for each night of your trip, but it will not allow you to select campsites that are over 17.5 miles apart. Even if you think you can hike more than that, they have restricted that, so you're just not able to do that. They say that this is to prevent hikers from booking overly ambitious permits because this is such a challenging trail. So if you do win the lottery and you're able to put together a itinerary online, but it's not quite perfect, it's not exactly what you want, there is going to be another chance for you to change that. That will be like the day before or the day that you start your trip. You can go to the Wilderness Information Center and talk to a ranger and say, hey, this is what I have, but I would prefer this. Like, is there any availability at this campsite? And they can tweak it for you if there are spots. So if you want to do a bigger day than 17.5 miles, when you are physically there with the ranger, they are able to do that for you. But I might not recommend it because it's really hard. I think that's pretty much all for the early access lottery. Next is going to be the sort of general on sale permits. So after the early access lottery has ended around the end of April, the remaining campsites are put up there and are available for anyone to grab. There are not any additional campsites put out at this time. It's just everything that is left over from the early access lottery. If you're wanting to do a complete through hike of the Wonderland Trail, I think this is the least likely option for getting a completed permit, because there really are just a few campsites like here and there. It's really hard to put something together. I've tried. I feel like you'd probably have to get pretty lucky with what's left over in order to make this happen. But it is good for things like if you're just wanting to do a section of it, or there are options for like smaller loops where you do like part of the Wonderland Trail and then you hop on to a surrounding trail and you can do shorter loops that way. So this is a really good option for that, because there are campsites and shelters and things like off of the main Wonderland Trail, and those are available this way. And so that is a really good option if that's what you're looking for. The third option is the walk-up permit. This one is a little bit of a gamble, especially if you live kind of far away and are maybe even like flying in to do this trail, because it's not guaranteed that you're going to get a permit. They are available at a first come, first served basis, and you can only reserve them either the day of or the day before you're wanting to start your trip. So it's a little iffy, but this is what I did in order to get a permit. I was able to get a walk-up one. I live about 4 hours from the area of Longmire in the park, so if I didn't get a permit, for me, it wasn't going to be that big of a deal because I do live relatively close to this trail. But if you're wanting to acquire one of these, you do have to be there in person, and you have to go to one of the wilderness information centers and talk to a ranger. I personally recommend coming prepared with a few different options for how you want to do this hike. There's a website called Wonderland Guides, and it is really helpful in creating itineraries. So you can go in there and you can select where you want to start, which direction you want to go, and whether or not you want to do this break park alternate, as well as how many days you want to hike this trail. And it will put together an itinerary for you, and then you can adjust as needed. And I found that super helpful when planning this trail. When I got to the park, I had options to start at a few different places, also going different directions. So some options were clockwise, others were counterclockwise. I had a 7-day itinerary and an 8-day itinerary and things like that. And I had sort of put them in order of like what I preferred, so I could start with that with the ranger. And I thought that was super helpful. Another note is if you are using the Wonderland Guides website to make these itineraries, I found it helpful to pair that with Far Out, because it doesn't tell you the elevation gain and descent, and I think that's pretty critical information for this trail because there is so much of it. So I would take the mileage for a day, put it into Far Out, and figure out the elevation gain and descent to determine if I thought that was something that I could do or not. For the walk-up permits, they do hold back about 1/3 of the availability at the campsites. So when you go in, it's not like you are still dealing with the same like remnant options you are with the online general sale. There is additional availabilities, but it's still pretty iffy. So the best advice I can give is to just be as flexible as possible if you really want to hike this trail. Because I did a walk-up permit, I'm gonna share things I did to be successful in getting a permit. Like I said, I came with a bunch of different itineraries ready, so I had different options. I also hiked this trail at the end of September, so it was at the tail end of the hiking season. I think that helped because there's less demand for the campsites during that time because there is more chance of rain. I was very blessed and only had 1 day of rain. I think that helped a lot, just being at the end of the season. I arrived at the Wilderness Information Center at about noon. I was stressing out. I wanted to be there earlier, but there was more traffic than we expected getting there, so that is when we arrived. But the rangers were able to help me build basically the itinerary that I wanted. Just instead of starting in Longmire like I thought, I started at a trailhead called Box Canyon. So instead of having a somewhat easy first day, I kind of had to jump into a pretty hard day right away, but that was okay. I got to hike the trail. Again, because I hiked it in September, I went in the day before I wanted to start. And so that night, I was able to get a campsite at the Cougar Rock Campground and stay there the night before I started the trail. If you are going during the peak summer season, this campground is pretty popular and it's a lot less likely that you'll be able to just walk up and get a campsite. Another reason why I chose to do it at the end of September, park in general is less crowded. No matter which way you end up getting a permit, the cost is going to be the same. It'll be $10 per night, and then there's also a $6 non-refundable transaction fee or whatever. So I spent 6 nights on trail, so my permit cost $66. I think that's pretty much all for the permits that I could think of, but if you have any questions, let me know. Next, I want to talk about just some general things that I was really curious about before I started the trail, so I would assume that other people would have these questions as well. So next, I'm going to talk about the backcountry campgrounds themselves. There are a few front country campgrounds that you could stay in, like White River and Cougar Rock, like I mentioned. Those ones are going to be a little different because they'll probably have either pit toilets or flush toilets, maybe some running water, things like that. But in general, I'll be referring to the backcountry campsites or campgrounds. So when you get your permit, it will tell you which campground that you have to stay at, but the permit does not tell you which specific site in that campground that you need to stay at. So when you get there, there are some numbered sites that you can choose from based on if they're taken already or not. At every single campground, there's at least one bear pole to hang your food. There is also going to be a pit toilet / privy at all of the campsites. They are all relatively close to a water source. I think the furthest that I had to go was about 1/4 mile each way to get some water. This was because I was later in the season, so some of the water sources were dry by the time I got there, so I had to go a little bit further at least one of the campgrounds. So I was the only person on my permit because I was doing this hike solo, but if you have other people on your permit with you, you all have to camp in one campsite. I believe you can have up to 5 people without them considering you a group. If you have 6 to about 12 people, then you are a group and you must reserve the group campsite, and not all campgrounds have a group campsite, so that's a little trickier. If you're hiking with 5 people, you will have to all fit your tents in one area. I don't know if you'd be able to fit 5 tents, maybe like 3. Another thing to note is that campfires are not allowed at any of the campgrounds, but stoves are, so you can bring a stove to cook your dinner. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about navigation on this trail. I was asked a few times whether or not there were blazes on this trail, sort of like on the Appalachian Trail where you see the white paint on the trees. I didn't really see any consistent blazes on this trail. Nothing super obvious. One orange spray painted tree and then like an orange rock, the higher elevation areas. So maybe at one point it was blazed, but when I was out there, it was really inconsistent. But there are signs at pretty much all of the trail intersections telling you which way to go. So that was really helpful. So if you got to like a Y in the trail, you just look for the sign and it would tell you where you needed to go. There were a few times where I was going down the trail and I just didn't see any signs for a really long time, but there hadn't been any intersections or anything, but I just wanted to like double check to make sure I was going the right way. So what I did was I would pull up far out which is an app on my phone, and I had pre-downloaded and purchased the Wonderland Trail map. I could pull that up and see where I was in relation to the trail, and I was pretty much always where I needed to be. But another good thing about Far Out is that it tells you where water sources are, where the campsites are. You can figure out how much farther you need to go, how much more elevation you have to go up or down. There is an option for people to leave comments, especially for things like water sources. That was really helpful, especially when I went to know whether I could expect a water source to be dry or flowing. So I really recommend using Far Out or something like it, because you can find out so much information about the trail that is really helpful. Another thing that I wondered about before starting this trail is if I needed a bear canister or not. And the answer is no, they are not required. I believe that they used to be, but since they have installed bear poles at all of the campgrounds, you no longer need to carry a bear canister, but you are required to hang your food, your wrappers, any sort of smelly items like sunscreen, chapstick, deodorant if you bring it, things like that at night on the bear poles. Another thing I was curious about before starting the trail was if there was any options to cache food, and the answer is yes. Typically there are 3 places where you can cache food. One is Longmire, another one is the White River Wilderness Information Center, and the third one is typically the Mowich Lake Campground area. However, as of this year, 2025, there is a bridge that they have closed for the extended future because it's been deemed unsafe for cars to go over. So there's currently no access to that area by vehicle, so you're unable to cache food there. So right now your options are Longmire or White River. I personally chose not to cache any food. I just decided to carry it all with me from day one. I could have taken the time to drive to White River or leave some in Longmire. To me, it felt like a little bit more of a hassle than helpful, so I just decided to carry 7 days worth of food with me, and it turned out fine. If you're coming from out of state, you can mail your food caches, as long as you don't mail fuel. There's some different requirements and procedures that you need to follow for that. I'm not going to go into that kind of detail in this, but I will put a link in the description to the National Park website with all that information so you can find it. If you do cache food, I do want to note that it does need to be in either like a hard-sided bucket or a Rubbermaid like container with a lid so no critters can get into it. And then there's like specific ways that you need to mark it, like with your name, the date that you anticipate to pick it up, your permit number, things like that. All that information you'll be able to find if you follow the link in the description. The next thing that I was curious about before starting this trail was the water crossing situation. Like, this is a very big volcano, gets a lot of snow. There's probably a ton of snowmelt every year. Am I going to experience any dangerous river crossings? And luckily, currently, the answer is no. There are bridges at basically every single water crossing. There may be like a few small streams that you have to rock hop across, but all of the major ones have wonderful bridges. I do want to note that there are 2 suspension bridges that can be very wobbly when you cross them. So if you're scared of that sort of thing, maybe this isn't the trail for you, or maybe you'll have to push through that fear as you go across. But yeah, I was very thankful for these bridges on this trail because there are some very intimidating rivers that you'll cross, but they were a breeze with the bridges. More about water, I want to talk a little bit about the water sources on this trail. When I went at the end of September, water was actually pretty plentiful. It is towards the end of the season, so there's less snowmelt, but most of the sources that I came across were flowing. There were only a couple that weren't. I think the longest I had to go was only about 6 miles, and that to me like isn't that far at all, so it was super manageable. Again, these are all listed on Far Out, so you can see some up-to-date comments, as well as the rangers have up-to-date information on water sources and things like that. So when you go and pick up your permit, they will tell you this information. They had a sheet of paper with like water information, any trail reroutes, snow conditions, things like that they showed me. So I just snapped a picture of that so that I could have it if I needed it on the trail. So that came in handy a few times. I hiked this trail with a 3.5-liter water capacity. So I had a 1-liter bottle and another 1/2-liter bottle, and then I had my 2-liter Canuck water bag. So most of the time I was just hiking with 1.5 liters or less of water, and that worked out really well. When I would get to the last water source before camp, I would fill up my 2 bottles as well as my 2-liter water bag and bring that to camp so I had enough water to cook and drink at night and things like that. I think that's all for water. Next, let's talk about snow. When I did the trail late September, all of the snow had melted, so I didn't experience any snow. I didn't need to bring any traction, like micro spikes or anything like that. They say that the snow typically melts by mid-July, but that just depends on how much snow there was. But if you go in August or September, you're likely not to run into any. But again, the rangers have up-to-date information that they share with hikers so that you know about the snow conditions before you head out there. The next thing I'm going to chat about is the wildlife on the trail, and boy is it plentiful. Oh, there are so many cool animals in this park and on this trail. It is pretty amazing. I saw deer, I saw a fox, I saw some marmots, I heard elk, and I saw a bear. And of course, squirrels, chipmunks, birds, things like that are obviously out there as well. But a big question is, do you need bear spray on this trail? And my answer is, it is up to you whether you bring it or not. Depends on your comfort level. I ended up seeing a bear and a cub on this trail. I just had one encounter with them. I did talk to some people while on the trail, and someone said that they saw 11 bears. So they're definitely out there doing their thing. You're pretty likely to see a bear and encounter one. So if that makes you nervous, then maybe bring some bear spray. Other animals, the teeny tiny ones, the mosquitoes. I was lucky enough to not really see hardly any mosquitoes. I think there was like one water source where there were a few. That was it, which is a huge blessing because I know if you hike this trail earlier in the year, in the summer, July, August, the bugs are plentiful. And I've heard they can be quite relentless. If you're hiking it in the summer, I would suggest that you bring a bug net, bring some bug spray. I prefer Picaridin by Sawyer, long sleeves, long pants for camp, even though it's hot. You'll thank yourself for having those. And I would also say to spray your gear and your clothing with permethrin before you leave because that helps as well. That also helps with ticks. I didn't see any ticks when I was out there. Again, I was later in the season, but I was told that there were some ticks that had been seen near some campgrounds and things like that. The next question I had before starting this trail was, is there cell service? And the safe answer is no. It is very, very limited. I had a little bit of cell service like on the east side of the trail. So like the first day I was on trail, I was really spotty and I had some, but it wasn't that reliable. And then pretty much after that, I didn't get service again. I did, however, bring my Garmin InReach, so I was still able to check in every night with my husband, let him know that I made it to camp and things like that. So that was really helpful to have on this trail because there is no service. Whew, I feel like that was a lot. Sorry if I talked quickly. This is just an extremely beautiful but rugged and challenging trail, but it is also super important to know your capabilities. If this is something you want to do, I would suggest doing some training for it. I have hiked thousands of miles and I think that this was a tough trail. It pushed me in a lot of different ways, but it also gave me some of the most beautiful mountain views I've ever seen. It is absolutely worth putting it on your bucket list. I tried to make this a comprehensive overview of this trail and everything that I wanted to know before starting it, but if I missed anything, please put your questions in the comments and I will answer those for you. Like always, thank you so much for watching and for supporting me and my channel. I really appreciate it. If you got any value from this, please hit that like button. If you want to see more, definitely subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and for being here. Mighty fine hiking, everyone. Bye!